I would like to preface this video by saying that the following opinions are coming from the mind of a prequel lover, so beware. Okay, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. This thing came out 20 years ago, and I feel like it holds up extremely well. If we look at clips from episodes 2 and The Phantom Menace, we can see that the CGI, at least in my opinion, was quite inferior, especially in Attack of the Clones. You could see that they were in front of a green screen and everything was CGI, but in episode 3, you can definitely still tell that, but it takes a lot more effort to see that, if you catch my drift. In my opinion, an underrated aspect of this movie is the power of foresight. Basically, this movie was old news from the beginning. We knew that Anakin would fall to the dark side. We know that the Jedi Order would collapse. We know that the Republic turns to the Empire. This movie just shows how it all goes down, which isn't technically important, but then again, especially when you look at the first trailer for Revenge of the Sith, the whole thing was basically just the movie. It wasn't that you didn't know about what would happen in the movie. The plot is pretty obvious. Anakin falls to the dark side, the Jedi Order collapses, etc., etc. I already talked about it. But seeing how it all goes down is very interesting, and I think the movie probably benefits a lot from knowing what happens next. Now, let's break the movie down bit by bit, starting with the opening on Coruscant. It is probably my favorite opening scene in any Star Wars movie, and that's not just by default, because it is amazing. To me, it's pretty obvious that the CGI has improved from previous movies. You can tell that this is much better, and I think this movie visually still holds up to today. One small grievance I have with this scene is that in some action sequences, when they're fighting off Grievous in the cockpit of the Invisible Hand, there's no music playing, and I think that works for scenes like when Anakin and Padme are talking in their apartment with no chemistry, but it certainly just does not work for lightsaber fights. It is something completely unimportant, but I feel like some music would have gone a long way. And now let's talk about Anakin and Obi-Wan versus Count Dooku. I'm just gonna play the duel.
Sense great fear in you, Skywalker. You have hate, you have anger, but you don't use them.
Good, Anakin, good. Kill him. Kill him now.
I shouldn't.
Do it.
We, of course, know that "do it" is a massive meme, but it represents how Anakin is being controlled by Palpatine, and how Palpatine's starting to give him orders, and Anakin will obey. So there's some deeper meaning to that. Alright. Again, another example of this movie benefiting from knowing what happens next and using that to create foreshadowing. After this, we have a series of sequences taking place on Coruscant where Anakin consistently is reprehended by basically everyone in the Jedi Order, and Palpatine starts to get closer to him to make him his apprentice. Having the entirety of the first half basically take place on on Coruscant. The space battle is in space, but it's still over Coruscant. It shows how self-centered the galaxy is around Coruscant. Something I really like is the scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan say goodbye to each other, and Obi-Wan goes in the train, and he congratulates Anakin for being a hero. Really fleshes out their relationship. There's the Darth Plagueis scene, just thought I would mention that, but really, what is that bubble theater that they were watching? A lot of people like to complain about the Chosen One prophecy and how it's worthless and the prequels would have been better without it. I can't completely disagree, especially in the previous two prequel movies. In this movie, it definitely does something for Anakin's character, because in the middle of the movie, Anakin is not chosen to go after Grievous. Obi-Wan is chosen, and Anakin gets kind of angry because he is the chosen one, so he has a higher likelihood to defeat Grievous, and he feels like he should have been the one to go. When Obi-Wan says goodbye, old friend, some of the most heart-wrenching stuff in Star Wars when he realizes it's the last time that he sees Anakin as his Padawan.
Hello there.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
Execute Order 66.
Talking about the duel on Utapau, again, the CGI here is pretty good, and this duel was the end of the Clone Wars. Of course, we still have the Battle of Kashyyyk, which doesn't go on for too long, but we'll talk about it later. There's not really much to say about the Battle of Utapau, aside from hello there, and that Grievous's death was kind of graphic. Oh, and Palpatine sending the Separatist leader to Mustafar just so Anakin can kill all of them. Pretty messed up stuff. Speaking of messed up, the Youngling scene, which I really don't want to talk about, so let's move on. Now we have the Jedi Temple being stormed. I think we could have seen more of this. It's another small grievance I have with the film. Sure, there was a few hours of fighting. Really, all we get is Anakin coming into the Jedi Temple, and then we see one shot of the Jedi Temple being stormed by 501st Troopers, a bunch of dead Jedi, and then we cut to the Youngling scene, and then Anakin comes back to Padme's apartment, and the Jedi Temple is already smoked on fire. So whatever happened there? By the way, Luminara comes on board for the Battle of Kashyyyk. I only remember that because it was in the Lego set, the Catamaran. The Battle of Kashyyyk itself was very short, but what was there was some cool action with the Wookiees. Fun fact, they actually hired about 100 actors for the Wookiees, and then they just duplicated them with CGI. Seeing Corporate Alliance fighter tanks being run over by Wookiees and then destroyed, it's pretty cool. It never hurts seeing some Wookiee action. This is the only time I think we see Wookiees really in mass. It certainly makes them live up to their reputation, but overall it's just Yoda overlooking a bit of action, and then he starts seeing visions of Order 66 happening throughout the galaxy, and then he beheads Commander Green, and he escapes with Chewbacca, which made for a pretty boring level in LEGO Star Wars. Having all of those Jedi die, it was only really that impactful after the Clone Wars, because then we got to know each of their characters. So of course this is something that it doesn't exactly matter for this movie because they didn't get to meet these Jedi. But when the Clone Wars came around, they decided to actually give arcs to each of these Jedi, and now we get to know them, and be sad when they die. Palpatine's arrest also comes around. I decided to lump this into the Order 66 sequence because it is part of the events of Order 66 by a technicality. I think this scene is really good. The lightsaber duels of the prequels are all amazing, and since you already knew that, there's not much to say about this one, except for the fact that Palpatine killed all three of those Jedi really fast, though at least Mace Windu was able to stand his ground for quite long until Anakin showed up. I'm gonna say Mace Windu died. I don't think he's alive, and I really don't want him to because they're just bringing back too many characters. It is confirmed that it was the dark side of the Force who reached out to Palpatine and basically told him, call your apprentice Darth Vader for no particular reason. Yet again, another example of this movie benefiting from knowing what happens next and using that to create foreshadowing. I haven't talked about Padme this entire video, and that's because she frankly does nothing aside from talking to Anakin and not really being of much help. And that's pretty much all she does in the entire movie, aside from worrying Anakin because she may die, but we'll get to that one later. When Obi-Wan goes back to Coruscant, I will forever defend that when he saw the hologram of Palpatine calling Anakin Darth Vader, I'm gonna say that he was in shock stasis. And then he is chosen to go after Anakin on Mustafar. Side note, every single one of those senators who was applauding Palpatine when he decided to create the Empire, all of them are idiots.
I have the high ground!
I absolutely love this duel. This is the scene that you were just seeing now. I don't like where you can see Anakin choked Padme when Padme dies because of a broken heart. Okay, now I'm gonna get all ranty for the first time in this video. You really couldn't come up with any other idea for why she could have died. You couldn't come up with anything else. And worse, her development in the Clone Wars makes the scene even worse. Why would she die of a broken heart when she has 2 children to take care of? I get that she loves Anakin and all, but seriously, in the Clone Wars, she was willing to die when the Blue Shadow virus came up. How can you do that and do this most selfish thing where you die because you're sad that Anakin turned to the dark side? How are these two the same character? I don't understand. Rant is over. Now let's talk about the good stuff. The actual duel. Now, some people will tell you that the high ground scene is very dumb, and I'm here to completely disagree with that. They will say, oh, just admit it's goofy and move on. That is quite simply not the case. If we analyze both this duel and the duel of the Fates from the Phantom Menace, you can probably compare these duels and come to the conclusion that Anakin was trying to emulate the exact same move that Obi-Wan pulled off in episode 1, and that he failed because he is way overconfident. Yes, I also enjoy Attack of the Clones. But anyways, one of the few things that Attack of the Clones really did amazingly showed that Anakin was quite overconfident. He literally jumped off a ship in Coruscant just to try and capture Zam Wesell, except so far, especially in that scene that I just mentioned, his overconfidence had worked in his favor, like in the Clone Wars show, but since that came out after Revenge of the Sith, it does not have an impact in my judgment of this movie. How are these two the same person? I don't understand. That still doesn't change Anakin's clear overconfidence. He is very confident in himself throughout these movies. You can see that when he jumps off the ship in Attack of the Clones, and even dating back to the Phantom Menace, where he went to pilot a Naboo starfighter at age 9, but he was still able to destroy an entire Separatist control ship. Again, at this point, his overconfidence had worked in his favor, but now it did not. And his overconfidence is what led him to try to recreate Obi-Wan's duel with Maul and try to use that to his advantage. Now let's present the arguments and counter-arguments for the high ground being stupid or not. You could say that Anakin and Obi-Wan were overcoming collapsing buildings, debris and lava, tiny little pipes. They were on platforms and mining droids on top of lava, and then Anakin couldn't overcome just a couple feet above him in the ground? Well, to that I say, throughout the entire duel, the rope swinging, they both had an equal chance of cutting each other's rope. The debris and lava, they could both take a wrong turn and fall into the lava. And what about the little pipes? They were at the exact same height on the pipes and on the bridge and inside of the collapsing building. They were always equals until Obi-Wan got the high ground, which is why the scene isn't stupid. Someone actually had higher chance than the other to win the duel, which Obi-Wan inevitably does. Now about the duel of the Senate. Overall, it was a pretty good duel. It was cool to see the Senate collapsing. It's a prequel duel, so it always gets some enjoyment out of you. I guess it's just cool to see the peak of the Jedi and the Sith fighting. And Padme's death. You know, I have some things to say about this one, but really, it comes down to, you couldn't have come up with any other medical reason why she could have died. No, she has to die from a broken heart. At least her funeral scene was probably the only part of her death that actually got me emotional. Jar Jar shows up, so that's always a plus. C-3PO gets his memory wiped, which explains why he didn't remember Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 4. And he was also the first character to speak in episode 4, and the last one to speak in Revenge of the Sith, which which means that George Lucas's saga is started and wrapped up by the same character. Owen and Beru also technically show up, and what's interesting is that every single element of this scene was shot separately, from Owen Lars to Beru Lars to the homestead to Obi-Wan. And after that, we have around 10 minutes of credits, where instead of talking about the credits, we're just gonna say that this movie is great, and I'm gonna give it a 9.9999999. This movie also spawned some really good Lego sets, so it'll always be good to me no matter what. Bye, guys.